Right, it's past, so I think we'll start. People will probably do still join throughout. Obviously, everyone's busy, aren't they? They're just bobbing in and out, which is why it's great that they're just short webinars for people to be able to come to. So welcome everybody to Thursday's webinars. And today we've got Anna and Chris, who I'll hand over to in a minute, and who'll be able to do their introductions. If you just make sure your microphones are on mute, that'd be great, just because sometimes you get a bit of back noise. If anybody has any questions or any comments, please, do shout out, put your hand up, put them in the comments box. It's really good to hear feedback from you all. So obviously, we know how we can improve or what it is you want from us. At the end of each session as well, we are putting a link in for a short evaluation. It's the same link, but it's for each valuation. Each webinar needs a different evaluation. That would be great if you could complete that. And all the webinars are being recorded and will be on the website as well. If you've got any colleagues that have unfortunately not been able to attend, then please direct them to the website. So I will turn my camera and mic off, and I'll hand over to Anna and Chris. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris and Anna.
Oh, thank you for having us. Thank you very much for joining us. Our presentation is Rethinking Dads and learning from Grimsby, which is where we are based. Sorry, I just need to get my computer all sorted, and then I'll go through to the next one. So, Anna, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah, so hi everybody, thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Professor Anna Tarrant. I'm a Professor of Sociology at the University of Lincoln. I also lead a qualitative longitudinal study called Following Young Fathers Further, which explores the parenting journeys and support needs of young dads. And we're going to be talking about a case study from that research today, the Grimsby Dads Collective, which is all about the promotion of father inclusive practice, but we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation.
And I'm Chris. I work for the NHS, but I also work with Quorum as well on this project, and I'm also a qualified social worker as well. I've only been part of the project for a small amount of time, recently asked to get involved to help with a few bits and pieces in Grimsby, but again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you have any questions, by all means, we don't mind you asking throughout our presentation. If you put your hand up and if we can see you've got your hand raised, we're happy for you guys to come in and have a conversation with us and ask questions. If that's right, Anna, that's all right, isn't it, with you? Perfect. Yeah, good. So we'll crack on because we haven't got a lot of time. So first question we like to ask our people who get involved in the work that we're doing is, how do we view dads? And generally speaking, when we think about it, when we're in these professional forums, when we are engaged in this conversation, we do think of some quite nice things. And we found this in the training that we've been offering in Grimsby, a lot of positive feedback, the strength behind it, being a good role model and things like that. Now, my background is actually working within the family courts as well. So I did a lot of work with the family courts over about 10 years, worked with a lot of professionals across the board. And when dads were discussed, sadly, it wasn't very positive at all. I mean, I've put some comments on the PowerPoint, hopefully you can see it. And these are comments that I heard over my 10-year period. And it wasn't coming from the mums involved in cases. This was coming from social workers, from health experts, solicitors, barristers. There was a very, very negative tone about dads and their involvement with children. And what we wanted to do with this training is really tackle that kind of unconscious view of dads. We haven't got time to do a lot of the case studies and a lot of the tasks that we do during the actual training that we hold in Grimsby for professionals. But what we found was when you took out names, like we took out names and you took out roles like mum and dad, and you started putting tasks out that related to children, the people involved in the training automatically related all the childcare duties and all the positive things about the childcare to mum, and more the negative vibes towards dad. And we found that was quite interesting. But then we had conversations about it, and actually a lot of the reasons behind this came down to research and things that they've seen in case studies or online or in adverts or in on TV shows, and it links quite closely with the reason why we've been asked to speak at the Icon Week, which is one of the statistics that is used within the Icon training, which should be on the screen now. 70% of babies who are shaken by men. Now, in the Grimsby area, when the Icon training was being delivered and rolled out, we linked in with the Following Young Fathers further research, the Grimsby Dad Collective that we'll talk about in a bit, and the YMCA who are supporting this project as well. And one of the questions that we've added into our Icon training, rather than leaving it as it is why. Why is it 70% of these cases involve men as the perpetrators? Before we started asking the question why, and we left it open to interpretation, what we found was that that this statistic was making people more risk adverse when it came to dealing with fathers. But when we unpicked the reasons why, we found that the professionals were quite good and quite open to thinking about, well, maybe it's because these dads don't have the same level of support as some of the mums. We unpicked it further with health visitors, midwives, children's services throughout the training sessions, and it was all a consensus that actually, yeah, it is something that's happening in Grimsby at the minute, and probably nationally as well, actually. One of the things I found with shaken baby injuries, we dealt with quite a few of them when I was working in court, and all of the cases involving babies, and I say all, and it was all of the cases that I dealt with involved babies that had been shaken, the sustained head injuries. It wasn't something that was planned. It wasn't something that parents meant to do. It was something reactive in the moment, and it was probably there were probably contributing factors to most of the cases, like mental health conditions, drug misuse problems, and adverse childhood experiences when we're parents that then suddenly become parents as
Sorry
well.
to stop you there, but somebody said they can't see your presentation. I can see it. Can everybody else see it? Is it
Yeah,
maybe
Yes,
it's just
I can see it.
maybe Emma, you might need to rejoin. Maybe
sorry, Emma, the PowerPoint gremlins, clearly.
Yeah, sorry, IT. If you want to log out and rejoin Emma. Okay. Okay, thanks, Emma. You've got the message. Sorry, Krishna.
No bother at all. You've I need to get back my flow now. So
I know, sorry.
We'll do what? Yeah, so within the court proceedings that I dealt with, a lot of these shaken baby injuries, it was very spur of the moment, very emotional, very reactive. It wasn't something that was planned, premeditated, or anything along those lines. And so it linked in with what our professionals in Grimsby were saying in relation to, are dads getting enough of that parenting support? It also, the discussion locally, this is probably a paper that a lot of you have seen. It came out in 2021, The Myths of the Invisible Men. I won't read what's on the screen because on the recording you can probably take a look at it if you want to at a later date, or you've probably seen the research already. But essentially it was a very small sample, but the outcomes of it showed that a lot of the perpetrators of this violence against babies and young children, they were invisible. They weren't seen by professionals. People didn't know they were in the house. People didn't know that they had a caring responsibility for these children. And it was good for us because it gave us a bit of a platform to plug our work and what we're doing. However, there were lots of benefits to it. So NSPCC locally and nationally started doing work. The NHS did as well. Icon developed a group as well to talk about dads as well, which is really good, and it came from these sorts of conversations. However, what we also found was that the professionals who had looked into this research and found it very interesting, it really was, it started seeing dads through the lens of risk, which isn't essentially what we wanted to happen from this. And it impacted how professionals worked with fathers, especially when it came to working with dads with young kids. A year later, NSPC produced another document, and within this document, it identified that there were two types of fathers that we should be working with. So the hidden men, there were two types of hidden men. So the one was the one that was discussed in the Myths of the Invisible Men research a year before. So the ones who could pose a risk to children that we don't know about. But the other one is the one that could have protected and nurtured a child. And they were invisible as well. They didn't get the support that they needed to probably become the kind of dads that we really, really needed them to be, or the kind of supportive partner that we needed them to be. And they were overlooked. And this was something that we saw across the board in education. There are examples of it in the training. So people from education raised examples in their practice where this happened. People in health did the same. But people in social care also did the same when children were going through child protection proceedings and things like that. So we worked out it was actually quite a big deal. And whilst we don't want to minimize that there are dads out there that do need support, that do pose a risk, and they do need that intensive support, more of our project wanted to talk about the dads that people missed, the ones that did sit back, the ones that probably in the corner of some of the waiting rooms where appointments were happening with their kid, and they kind of said, well, you talk to mum, I'll just sit here. We wanted to deal with those dads. So within our area, there were lots of debates about risk and resource, and you probably heard this term about dads being seen as a risk and dads being seen as a resource. But where we started talking to our professionals locally, we worked out that we needed to actually simplify things more, because there were organisations in our area who decided on having an umbrella over dads and seeing them as a risk first, because it was felt it was the safest thing to do. Now, what this kind of meant for us was there were loads of dads out there who weren't being linked to children on their systems, who weren't being considered when children had particular health needs and needed support. And there was oh, I've lost my flow again. Actually we needed to step back a bit and say to people, you know what, rather than thinking about these risk and resource debates, let's take a step back. Let's talk about parents. Let's talk about mum as mum, dad as dad, and let's start from the beginning. There are, I mean, for those people, I mean, I think professionally and personally, you probably had lots of dealings with families. And what we wanted to instill in our workers in North East Lincolnshire is all families are different. You have dads who are natural parents. You have mums who are not natural parents. You have parents that really, really do need each other to be able to have this supportive and parenting relationship. You have dads that don't attend meetings because they're scared rather than them not wanting to be there. There are some homes where when professionals go in and start talking about primary carers, it causes quite a lot of conflict, because actually people don't identify as primary carers much. Maybe they're shared parents. Maybe when people start identifying people as primary carers, what we're doing is we're putting a lot of effort into supporting these identified primary carers and ignoring that there is another parent out there that needs support as well, because they are caring for that child. So on the screen, you'll see lots of bits and pieces about parenting identity, cultural factors, vulnerability, children needs. But in North East Lincolnshire, we are talking more within policy, within guidance, within general practice, within training of thinking family. And it's a very, very old term. It's been around for a really, really long time. But in a lot of the work that we're doing that's linked in with NSPCC work in the area, with larger reviews of case studies in the area, is this lack of thinking family. And we are really, really trying to push to bring this think family back into our area. One of our midwives has contributed to the training. She provided a case example. And one of the things that she left us with, and we share it in every single training session we do, is how you cannot understand how a child's needs are being met fully if you don't understand 50% of the care in partnership. And this came out of a case that she dealt with, that she was working on, where actually she felt that dad was missed, and because of that, it impacted the family 5-6 years later when the second child was born. We won't go into the case, it's quite a long case study. But essentially, she changed her practice before we came along. She decided that she needed to change her practice and find out more about dad. And she said it was as simple as saying, "Dad, what's your name? Brilliant. How are you doing?" And actually, that's changed how she sees her role going forward now. So it is working. It is changing. Some simple changes, but they are making a difference in our area. Now I'm going to pass on to Anna, who's going to talk about the clever research bits behind it.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just to make the point from the outset, really, that a lot of the observations that Chris has made in his own practice are reflected in academic research as well, and they're being captured and both driven by academic research. And it's this question of how we do something about the learning around cultural shifts towards more involved and engaged fathers that has driven much of my work. I think it's just worth noting a few recent statistics that have been generated and are talked about by Scott Mayer from the Fathers Network Scotland. But he's found that 98% of dads are at the birth of their children now, 87% are involved in day-to-day parenting. A third of dads are changing their jobs, particularly post-pandemic, so they can spend more time with their children. And then 2/3 of dads have also requested changes in working patterns as well. So there are real strong evidence shifts that fathers want to be there, they want to be involved in the lives of their children, and that they're making the changes required in order to be able to do that. My research interests were also driven by practitioner observations. I was working with Bren Neal, Emerita Professor at University of Leeds, as part of the Following Young Fathers study, which was conducted 2010-2015. And that study was driven by an argument that young fathers are engaged with in practice and policy to some extent, but often in deficit approaches and ways. And while we've got an evidence base on young mothers, we didn't know very much about young dads and what their parenting journeys were like and what their support needs were like. And over time, this has developed into a much larger and longer term programme of work, leading to the Following Fathers Further study, which I now lead, and that started in 2020. But all of that research is based on participatory methodologies, where we're working with professionals who champion father inclusion in their practice, so that we can make sense of what works in practice and effective practice in support of fathers more generally. And I think there is a connection here. As much as our empirical focus is young dads, what we're finding is relevant to all dads in all circumstances, and that's whether they're single, non-resident, all those different sort of individual personal circumstances as well. And what we're trying to do through those methodologies is create new models of practice that promote father inclusion, built on the evidence that when dads are involved, it's not only good for dads, but it's good for mums and children as well. And that's where the Grimsby Dads Collective work sits within this broader programme of research. Thanks, Chris. So again, as Chris has already mentioned, young dads are often constructed and framed in deficit terms, and that reflects the risk-based approach that Chris was observing in his own work. What the Following Fathers research has found is that young dads universally want to be there for their children. Admittedly, we are working with a sample of young dads who are trying to be there for their children, but we worked with a sample of 31 young men, some of whom were non-resident or had become a father but were no longer in a relationship with the mother or with their child as well. But we're looking for ways, looking for support to be able to be there for their children and engage with them. What we found in that research is that there were high rates of unplanned conception, but this didn't ever result in an unwanted child. So they took a bit of time to adjust to the news that they were going to become a parent under the age of 25, which is the definition we use, but always negotiated and navigated those changes over time. They adhered strongly to this ethos of engaged fatherhood, so they were keen to adjust the pregnancy, to be good fathers, and again, as I mentioned, including if they were single or non-resident. What we have found, and because of the nature of teenage pregnancy and when that occurs, is that lots of these young men lack relational, educational, socioeconomic or housing resources. And for those in particular, that really hampered their capacity to develop and sustain their role as a parent over time. And these were the kinds of challenges that they needed the most support with. And this was especially compounded for those who were vulnerable, so those living in entrenched poverty, those who'd been in prison or were still in prison, those brought up in the care system, and then those with mental health problems and concerns. Chris, next slide. In terms of their support needs, we followed them over time. We interviewed them multiple times, and we found that they come into the orbit of a range of mainstream and specialist services. But their engagement with those services is often hampered by a widespread view that they're hard to reach. And again, another deficit language that feeds into that risk narrative. And drawing on the work of Alison Hadley, what we've sought to do with the research is think more about and encourage professionals to think more about how services are actually hard to access for this client group. We also discovered that professionals were using a range of different practices, sometimes in combination. So there were really good examples of positive support for young fathers that involved bringing them into the work, asking how they were, engaging with them directly by collecting data, but also some more concerning practices of surveillance and sidelining. So surveillance and sidelining represent this more risk-based approach. So it either meant not asking about dad at all and sidelining them, or assuming that they were a risk to their children and then subjecting them to surveillance, which they find very difficult. So our arguments really are that seeing young dads as a resource for their children is central to a more compassionate and caring approach and ethos, and that there's value in that and in fostering that environment of practice and support in a way that's more redemptive and strengths-based. And again, we're seeing examples, great examples of this, particularly in specialist services for dads. Examples include North East Young Dads and Lads, and also Dads Matter and Dads Rock in Edinburgh. Next slide, please. So all of this evidence underpinned my broader fellowship and research question. How do we create a practice and policy ecosystem that's more father inclusive? And this is something I've published about recently, and I'm very happy to share that, and do follow up with me if you'd like to see a copy of that. But this is based on, again, the premise that father inclusion is beneficial to dad, to mum and to children. And we know again from existing evidence that creating father inclusive support environments has value, because it promotes dad's well-being, it helps to build fathers' capacity to support mothers' psychological well-being, dads can help to promote maternal health behaviours, and also children's mental health and development. So there's just another few examples of the benefits of doing this kind of work. So the fellowship is also an innovation fellowship, and what we've sought to do is co-create unique models of practice and support based on an existing model of practice called the Young Dads Collective. And this was originally a model that was co-produced with Young Dads in London. And since the London model has been in place, we've created two new models. We created a new one in Leeds, which was called the Young Dads Collective North, with partner John May, and then now the Grimsby Dads Collective. And I think what's so special about this model is that it sees fathers as experts by experience. They talk about some of the challenges they've experienced and that they've faced and had to navigate over time. They talk about what works for them in practice, and they share that with multi-agency professionals at training, which is what Chris has been talking about. It's incredibly powerful. It supported by professionals as well, so we help them to craft their stories in relation to existing academic research, but also in a way that moves beyond the deficit model, and helps and encourages professionals to think dad in particular ways. Thanks, Chris. And this responds directly in terms of Grimsby to an identified need. So we also conducted a survey in the area. We had 269 respondents, which is a high proportion for Grimsby as an area. Many of the people who responded were young dads. 40% of older dads, 34% of young dads said they were the main carer for their child, but then also working full time. 69% of young fathers were the main carer in an education. So again, managing and balancing different demands on their time. 99% said they were interested in joining a peer-to-peer support group for dads, which is compared to 59.5%. But again, that's still a relatively high figure, suggesting a need for dad support in the area. And they told us what they'd like to see as well through the Grimsby Dads Collective offer. So they wanted more access to information and advice. They were interested in things around child development, local activities they could engage in, how to look after babies and children, which is often a very difficult thing for men to ask and admit that they have a lack of confidence about, but also legal-based questions as well around child contact arrangements. And all of these aspects can be built into the training and can be built into the offer that we can provide to dads through the Grimsby Dads Collective model. Chris. So we created a unique partnership essentially. So we've had advice from Core and Family and Childcare on the model and how to replicate it, how that can work in the local area. It's hosted by YMCA Humber. We've also had evidence and feedback from John May at Leeds City Council, where we did the Young Dads Collective North. And we also have strategic oversight from Bernie as well. Bernie Taylor, I've got her name, it's gone out of my head. From Together for Childhood. I see you very regularly. And what that's helped us to do is embed this model in the locality. So we can be responsive to local need, and we can use empirical evidence to be flexible about the model and make sure that it's addressing local priorities. The very reason it's called the Grimsby Dads Collective is because we consulted with fathers in the locality and they felt that a place-based model would be useful. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to whiz through. But basically, the sort of theory of change for the model, and as mentioned by the manager of Core and Family Childcare, is that it's about service change. And service change has a whole host of other outcomes associated with that. So not only does the benefits of dads being involved in their children equate to benefits for families more broadly, but it also is a broader project around gender equality as well, and actually has broader societal implications too. So looking at different areas and how they're taking this model on has a much broader societal shift and impact, which we hope in future will lead to policy change and more focus on father inclusion in general. Thanks, Chris. In terms of the dads who've been involved, so the dads themselves value being listened to. They value meeting up with other dads as well when they do the planning, and they value being advocates as well for other dads like themselves. And professionals are telling us that they're changing their practice too. So, you know, they're thinking about how they're going to help dads, young dads, and thinking beyond mums. So we're seeing these tangible shifts.
Sorry, I shifted that too early.
Right.
I moved on too early. Sorry, Anna. So in terms of the training that we've been hosting in Grimsby, it's been really, really positive, incredibly positive. Each training session is sold out, and they are large training sessions, and they've sold out very, very quickly, showing that the area really, really wants this training. They need it, they want it, they're interested in this conversation. It's been accessed by all services across the board, so education have been involved, social care, health, voluntary sector. They've all attended, shared their stories and their cases, and it's been really positive learning, I think, for everyone to hear everyone else's point of view. We conduct feedback after the training as well. The feedback's been overwhelmingly positive in terms of the content, the conversations, the case studies, the task, but also the impact, the real world impact, the real world information that's going to help with frontline practice. It's all been helpful according to the feedback. Following the feedback, we've had quite a few emails from people in children's services and health services, and also education actually, who have just given us some examples of how it's changed their practice. We had one from early help, I think it was. I think that was probably quite recently, where a case that had been dragged on for a long time, Dad wasn't involved in it. And as soon as the supervisor had been on the training, she called up the worker, got the worker in, and they made a plan to involve Dad and to progress the case. And it's been successful, I think. It's been positive. There's been a request for additional training dates, and we've recently established that we've been embedded in local early help guidance, which has been a huge success for us. So we're really proud of ourselves for actually making such a big impact. It's been really positive. Now I can't move on the slide, Anna. Now that I want to, I can't. There you go.
So yeah, we're at our 11 o'clock mark, so a really quick whiz through, but father inclusive practice isn't complicated. I've just put a chat comment in there. It can be about you know, generating data about Dad. Just asking about Dad in the first place is really important. Very often we see in housing, for example, that young men are placed in homes that aren't suitable for raising children, which creates a barrier for them, you know. But if you ask if they're a dad, in theory, then better and more informed decisions can be made about the well-being of that young person and their children. It also doesn't require large amounts of resources. In the case of the GDC model, that has been invested in financially, but actually, whether it be universal service contexts or specialist service contexts, it's the relational work that's really core here. It's saying to Dad that you recognise they're there, that they may have some challenges that they need support and guidance with, but that you're listening in an authentic way, and you have the resources and the knowledge to be able to support them. Very often, actually, signposting to other local services can be really powerful, because it might be that you can't deal with something particular yourself. So having that local knowledge and awareness is also key in some of these support relationships. I think confidence is obviously a challenge as well, and often it is just a lack of confidence around how to talk to Dad. Very often you can't go into an encounter with Dad and say, tell me about your mental health and tell me what's going wrong for your in your life. You need to find common ground in the first place, and often that can be talking about hobbies, for example, or shared points of interest. A key point we want to make as father inclusives is not just about helping dads, it's about helping families. You know, fathers matter to children, and we need to keep that at the forefront of our minds, but they also support mums as well. Small changes can make big differences, and I think Chris demonstrates that beautifully with the example of how this support group we've created and this training offer is having broader policy impacts in the region. Professionals in Grimsby have welcomed this conversation about dads, and we're really confident and hope, and as part of our work and advocacy, is that other areas will also start developing and having these conversations too. We just want to sort of conclude really by saying that, you know, peer support and training models like the GDC are useful, but they should sit alongside one support where there are identified worries. So we wouldn't advocate just throwing a guy into a peer support group when he might have more specific challenges that need to be managed first. So we just want to make that clear that this is part of a broader complex of approaches that help us to support dads. But at the core of all of this really is to think family, and that's what we'd like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Anna. That's a really interesting presentation. And as you say, ICON is about really trying to change the shift and think how we work with dads in health settings and on all settings, really. You know, it is just a simple ask the question. The terms, like you say, about dads are hard to reach and things have always been used in the past, haven't they? But as you say, all the research shows that they want to be included. They just need to be asked. So yeah, that was really interesting and powerful. Thank you. Anybody got any?
I'm impressed with her timekeeping, Sue.
I know. Yeah, that's amazing.
And I saw a round of applause coming over from the from the DOPS as well. So thank you very much.
Has anybody got any comments or questions? Please shout out. You know, if it's going to what you're going to take away, if it's going to help. Hi Joe, if it's going to help with your practice. Did I just see a hand up, Joe? No.
I'm quite happy if you want to share. I mean, Anna, I suppose, are we happy to share all of our details? If anyone's got any questions, they can
That's
come to us.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just popped in the chat my email address, so do follow up if any of you have any other questions. I'll also share my website address as well, which has some of the latest research on young dads on there.
Because sometimes I feel, you know, within our Icon Dads group, Engaging Men's group, a lot of the conversations around the challenges, whereas actually, you know, we can't fix everything all at once, and we talk a lot about it, don't we, Krishna? We need to focus on the small changes, including dads, like simple things that have been mentioned early in the week, you know, changing letters. You know, when people have babies, they're always addressed to mum. Areas have just done a simple thing by making it more of a family focused letter. Please bring anybody you want, you know, people that are involved in caring for the baby to your appointments. Because if we're not sending those, including them from the beginning, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? Dads automatically used to think that it wasn't their role to be involved, and they used to just turn up. But unless they're getting that information firsthand, it isn't always passed on. So it's really powerful, and I think it's really important. Hi, Jan.
Hi, thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. I work with HDFT 0 to 19 services, and we are very much focusing on dads at the moment, and it's a particular interest of mine. I have a health visitor background, and we're really interested in dads and having dads champions in our service. A simple change that we can make is, as you've already said, Sue, it's about arranging an appointment around dad as well, considering dad. So, you know, historically and traditionally, health visitors make the appointment with mother. And we're trying to shift and say, you know, is dad around? Will he be available? We could do a later visit, or, you know, hopefully he's, you know, has some leave around the birth of the baby, and you know, altering our letters. You're absolutely right, is another approach. And as I say, we're just in the midst of establishing a dad's champion role in each of our contract areas in Harrogate. It's really exciting work and has to happen.
That's so exciting. I'm from Harrogate originally, so my family's still there. But that's personal side, but that's so exciting. You know, again, I think, you know, as a service, you can't necessarily take it all on, but again, if you kind of are developing that, you're having the discussions and the dialogues about it, and that then prompts other people, I think, to take on and create those spaces, and then that creates that more holistic local support environment, which, you know, is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jan. Karen?
Thank you both so much. That was really, really an excellent presentation. And I think I work with Jan. We both work in Durham, but I work for the ICB. And it's just, I think it's changing that mindset, isn't it? It's about, from a safeguarding perspective, from a safeguarding partnership perspective, it's thinking about, instead of dads being seen as the risk, as we often do, it's thinking of them in as you've mentioned, in that more you know, protective, supportive, you know, they really want to be engaged as being a parent and incorporating all of that. So I thought that was really powerful what you talked about today. So thank you for that, and we will take that message back.
That's
I think one of the
brilliant.
things that came up with the group work that we do in our training, it was a really interesting conversation, was about the appointments and things like that, because with the task, it brings up a lot of conversation about missed appointments, people not present and stuff like that. And what we found was, when dad wasn't present, it wasn't so much of an issue, but when mum wasn't present, it was an issue. And we kind of start talking about this. So, well, how is that even fair for mum? You know, why is that right that she takes on all that burden and dad doesn't? You know, dad doesn't turn up, and you don't challenge him, you don't bring him into that conversation. So I think with the appointment thing and trying to build it around dad, that's really important. It's a really, really good way to make sure dad is there. But also, I think by doing it, you're helping mum as well, because she's not taking on this massive task by herself. So I think it's a really good place to start, is with them appointments and making sure it's on both parents and not just one.
Absolutely, like you say, both parents has an impact on the family, don't they? You know, dad's role model, dad's is just as important as and I really like the statement about if you don't ask about dad, you're only getting 50% of the story. That will resonate with me. I really found that really quite a powerful statement. You know, it's true, isn't it? We just presume and we don't ask. And you do go into visits and you sometimes think, oh, dad's there. And I am conscious, I've probably done it myself. And you go, is mum around? You know, is mum, do you want me to wait for mum to come back down? She may be in the shower and dad's there with the baby. And, you know, it is definitely just that shift that people need to, that different mindset. That's brilliant. There's some comments in the, somebody's put it so hard when your service is specifically commissioned for mums and children under 2. Yeah, it is very difficult, isn't it? It's just changing that full shift. I think that's brilliant. Has anybody else got any more comments? Or
I think again,
Anna's put an email in there as well, so that's fine. Sorry, Anna.
to move you, Sue. I was just going to, for the unknown user comment there. I think one challenge with dads groups is that we're telling dads that involved dads are important, but then not necessarily spreading that message to mums and to families. So again, I think just having those conversations about dad, but in a more strengths-based way with mums, can be really powerful in its own right. Because again, you're sort of planting the seeds with mum that dad can and should be involved in helping where possible. So again, you know, instead of asking, I think, you know, from my, it's anecdotal, but my experience of going through maternity services is dad a risk? You know, is there any problem in the relationship kind of question, rather than is dad supporting, and you know, what's dad's role in all of this? So again, reframing the questions to mum, I think, can be a powerful way of just shifting that framing and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was brilliant. Thank you. I'll hang around if anybody has anything, but if anybody thinks of anything later and can't remember Anna's email, just email me and I'll put you in touch with Anna or Chris.
Always
and I
happy.
will put an evaluation, like I mentioned, link in the chat. We do the evaluations for each webinar, so I'll just put that in the chat.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Chris. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you later, everyone.